Earlier this year, I tackled a minimum turns or low turn count playthrough of Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door where I abused various mechanics in the game to play through the story while participating in as few battle turns as possible. It was one of the most fun challenges I've done for this game, and it's my most viewed video on this channel, so it really only makes sense for us to take a look at a minimum turns run in the Thousand Year Door remake. You might think that this would be pretty similar to the last video, but there's actually quite a few different required battles in the remake, different mechanics, and I have some new strategies to save turns that I didn't figure out in the original game. So along the way, not only will we strategize and figure out how many turns it takes for the remake, but we'll also compare it to the original game and see where it takes more or less turns. Now let's really quickly refresh ourselves on what counts as a turn in this game. In the last video, I described the cycle of Mario's turn, his partner's turn, and the enemy's turn as one turn in the game. So any battle finished within this loop would be a one-turn fight. This is all still true, but last time I didn't really talk too much about first strikes. There were a couple battles I won with first strikes that I still counted as a turn, but in the code for the original game, it technically doesn't even count as a single turn if the battle is finished by the first strike. Therefore, you could argue that my turn count was a few turns lower than what I stated in the video, but personally, despite the game's code, I still consider those to be turns in a battle. A first strike isn't its own distinct turn, but rather part of the cycle that makes up an overall turn. This may sound counterintuitive to not take whatever loopholes I can get, but it doesn't really feel in the spirit of a low turn count run to enter a battle, win it, gain rewards from it, and then not count it as a turn. Spoilers for the original video if you haven't watched it yet, now's a good time to pause and go do that if you're so inclined. My final turn count was 77 turns, although I had forgotten to count the 2 battles where Dupless challenges you and you run away, so my final count was technically 79. This is not the lowest possible score though, as at the time I was unaware of this video made by Arthur Yu, where he does a minimum turns run of his own and does some insane stuff to optimize it even further than I did. I'll go ahead and link his video below because I will be referencing it again and again in this one, and I used it as inspiration for some of the strategies I'm going to be using in the remake. His final turn count was 63, although since he was using the game's code as the ruling for first strikes, there were some stark differences in routing that saved him a few turns over my rule set. For now, I'll gloss over it and just say that under my rule set, his run would have been 69, LOL, turns. The main turns he saved over my original run were due to strategies for avoiding Bill Blasters in Pirate's Grotto and Palace of Shadow that I wasn't aware of, and some more advanced strategies on some bosses. Just like with my run in the GameCube version, I won't be allowing glitches since it makes the route and run way clunkier and less interesting to the average player. Arthur Yu also banned glitches in his run, but he did some stuff that seemed like a glitch and refuted it with, "This doesn't count as a glitch. Source, trust me, bro." The only other rule from the other video that I think is worth restating is that since this is a real-time attempt and there's a lot of R&D going on as I play, there were many times I accidentally ran into encounters that weren't required. If any of these happened, I simply ran away from them and didn't gain any star points or count it as a turn. I'll point out some of them if they're interesting, but most were just dumb slip-ups that I didn't want to reset the game for since this was already a really long playthrough as is. No advantages were gained from these, so I really don't think it's an issue. Now with all of that out of the way, it's just about time to get into the actual run. The only other thing I wanted to say was make sure you guys get subscribed if you like this video or any of the other ones on my channel. I know every YouTuber says this, but subscribing is such a great way to support a channel that you like, so if you want to help me keep making these videos, please consider doing it. I'm also thinking about starting live streaming here on this channel, so if you're interested in that, that's another good reason to subscribe, eh? Anyways, let's begin. The tutorial fight against Lord Crump in Rogueport unsurprisingly plays out the same between versions. Lord Crump has 5 health and each of Mario's attacks do 2 damage. As long as we super guard his first or second attack to deal an extra point of damage, he can be killed in 2 turns. I won't continue to point this out because, well, duh, but make sure you say no to Frankly's tutorials, otherwise you'd have to go through more turns. Next is the Goomba trio in the sewers, which can be easily swept away by a Fright Mask or Fire Flower. And now we already reach a huge difference from the last video. Remember how it took 2 turns to defeat the blooper since it was seemingly impossible to get through his 12 health in 1 turn this early in the game? Well, it's actually not impossible to 1 turn in either version, but it requires quite a bit of grinding. And no, not experience grinding since that would take us more turns, but instead shop points grinding. Every item you buy in this game grants you 1 shop point, and at certain intervals of shop points you're given free items as rewards for being an obedient little capitalist. It just so happens that some of the rewards from this program are super strong, namely the Thunder Rage and Shooting Star. They deal 5 damage to each enemy and 6 damage to each enemy respectively. And since the blooper has 12 health like I just mentioned, 2 shooting stars would be able to take him out in a single turn. The problem with this is that after you reach 70 shop points and earn 1 shooting star, you have to max out your shop points all the way for it to reset back to 1 so you can grind for a second one. Once you reach 300 and get the triple gold bar, the rewards completely roll back and you can earn all of them again infinitely. So basically, this means we have to purchase 370 items during the prologue to beat Blooper in a single turn. The cheapest way to do this at this point is to buy Tasty Tonics for 3 coins and then immediately flip them for 1 coin at a 2 coin loss per item. So in total, we'll need 740 coins, again in the prologue, to accomplish this. This sounds like a lot, and it is, but given the fact that we can sell a lot of the shop point rewards, it actually isn't too out of reach. We want to hold on to the shooting stars and the thunder rages for an upcoming fight, but everything else can be sold for extra coins. The gold bar is worth 100 and the gold bar times 3 is worth 300, but we'll need some capital to get us that far to begin with. So real quick, we'll have to take some time and grab all of the items, badges, and star pieces available to us right now. This is mostly just the mushroom and fire flower in the sewers, as well as this hidden copy of Pretty Lucky. Using the few star pieces we can find, we can buy the 3 cheapest badges from Dazzle and sell those as well. The coins were pretty tight in the original game, apparently requiring Arthur Yu to sell one of the Thunder Rages to make it just barely possible, but the coin economy is a lot more forgiving in the remake, so after over an entire hour of literally just buying and selling Tasty Tonics, the menus in this remake are so obnoxiously slow, I had bagged 2 Thunder Rages and 2 Shooting Stars. So finally, after all of that, we can go on and kill the blooper in 1 turn instead of 2. Not worth it for any sort of real-time savings, but this is the fastest I've ever done the fight itself in isolation, so that's worth something, I guess. This chapter starts out fairly similar to the original run, although the Goombas in Petal Meadows are absolute gamers this time around, and they're way harder to avoid than in the GameCube version. After talking to Mayor Kroop and heading past the gate to Schwank Fortress, we're ambushed by a Koopa encounter that was not in the original game. This serves as a slight tutorial for audience and stage mechanics, and it even forces us to hammer the Koopa in front with Mario's action. Luckily, after Goombella's done talking, she's given freedom for her portion of the turn so we can use a fire flower to finish them both off. Next, we have the mini fortresses where each of them can be beaten in 1 move by using a POW block, which is pretty much the intended method anyways. Onto the Schwank Fortress itself, we can slip past these optional fuzzies in the overworld, but we do have to fight each 4-pack that spawns after grabbing the sun and moonstones. A fire flower on each of these fights makes for a couple easy kills, and after the second one, I gain my first level up. Putting this one into FP is very important for Hooktail, but after that, every level we get is going to go into badge points since the amount of FP we have matters very little when we're beating each fight as quickly as possible. The gold fuzzy is another fight that I took 2 turns to beat in the original, but could have saved a turn if I had grinded shop points. And luckily, as you just saw, I did grind them this time so I can use those 2 Thunder Rages to delete his 10 health in a single turn. Oh, and there's the multi-bounce badge in this block right here, which will be incredibly useful later, so we'll make sure to snag that. Next up is Hooktail's Castle, where we can get the power bounce badge also, which is basically required for this challenge. The first fight we reach in the castle is the Red Bones encounter. Just like in the original, a couple items can wipe the board instantly and we can move on. Once again, the Dole Bones in the overworld are much tighter to avoid here, but it's still doable and we can progress through the castle. Manipulating this Dole Bones to get out of our way so we can hit the yellow switch is actually way more forgiving in this version, but it's definitely cool that it works about the same in both. Once we get to this shine sprite by the big door to the outside bridge, it's going to be backtracking time since we need to rank Goombella up to defeat Hooktail in as few turns as possible. Luckily for you, I can just cut around and make this seem like it happened instantly. It didn't, and then we can head up to Hooktail. Avoiding this spiky Goomba on the tower is janky, but I made sure to demonstrate that it was doable before saving my game and heading into Hooktail. Now Hooktail, just like last time, is a pretty complicated one. She has 20 health and starts with 1 defense until until you hit her with the attack effects badge, which then lowers her defense to 0. And of course, after you deal 20 damage to her, she'll heal 10 back for the second phase. Due to the fact that the turn resets after she heals, this fight couldn't be done in one turn even if we could do all the damage we wanted. And, well, we really can't do all that much damage. Power Bounce and Multi-Bonk are by far our highest damaging attacks, but dealing 20 damage with just 2 of them is slightly out of reach. In Arteryu's video, he does in fact beat Hooktail's first phase in a single turn with 2 10-bounce attacks, but this is reliant not only on timing the button presses, but also on RNG. In the original 1000 Year Door, Hooktail has what is known as a soft cap of 9 power bounces. This means you are guaranteed to be able to power bounce or multi-bonk her 9 times, assuming you hit the inputs correctly, and anything after that is down to RNG. For every bounce past the soft cap, there is a 1 in 3 chance of being able to continue, so it very quickly becomes statistically improbable to keep bouncing. Now, as for the remake, we don't know if they changed her power bounce cap under the hood, but it seems unlikely since most enemies carried over the exact same stats and weaknesses from the original. I tried several times to reach 10 bounces with either character, but couldn't even get close due to how much weirder the timing is in the remake. The most frustrating part about this is that since I'm playing on Switch, I don't have save states to try over and over without losing, resetting the whole fight, and skipping through all the dialogue again. Ultimately, I settled for a 3-turn kill just like I did in the original because I spent over an hour resetting this fight and trying to no avail. On turn 1, I used Hammer to lower her defense and deal 1 damage, and then I multi-bonked with Goombella for another 8. On turn 2, I used a power bounce with Mario and hit her for 7. She happened to get hit by the stage, but even if she wasn't, a regular head bonk from Goombella would finish phase 1. After refusing all of her tricks, she eats the audience and heals for 10. Then I used a Fire Flower with Mario since it's an easy 3 damage, and finally I finished her off with 1 more multi-bonk. Once again, this is probably possible to do in 2 turns, but no matter what, I just couldn't do it. If somebody is able to send me footage of this being done, I'll add a pinned comment amending this, but for now, we'll take the L with 3 and move on. Despite the extra Koopa battle, this chapter actually has the same amount of turns as the original since you're no longer forced into this Dull Bones encounter after the Miss Mouse room. Neat. On to Chapter 2, there's a handful of incredibly important badges that we can get that are pretty much necessary in order to keep the turn counter as low as possible. Mega Rush P is right inside the fence by Mayor Kroop's house, and the Mario version of Mega Rush can now be bought from Charlieton in Rogueport. He also sells Jumpman, which is a fantastic cheap attack increase for Mario. I did have to sell some badges in order to afford this stuff, but there's plenty of badges that we can obtain that are completely irrelevant to this challenge. Defensive stuff is not useful because our enemies will almost never get to attack us under these conditions, so that helps fill out Mario's wallet for things that will make us stronger. While we're at it, buying the shooting star that Charlieton sells will also help immensely. It is possible to get Power Plus for Mario by farming star pieces right now, but it's not really necessary since we don't have much badge power anyways. That's pretty much it for the prep, so now we can march onwards into Bogley Woods. None of the enemies are particularly hard to avoid, so we'll just play until the fight against the 3 shadows. At any point before the fight, it's important to set Mario's health to 1 by using overworld hazards. This will allow him to take advantage of the 5 attack granted by Mega Rush when he's in peril. This can either be done with water in Rogueport, but more conveniently, it can be done with these pits in the background parts of Bogley Woods. With Mario at 1 health, he can multi-bounce the 3 shadows for 6 damage each, and then a shooting star with the partner's turn can finish them off the rest of the way. Due to the fact that Marilyn has 12 health, this is an exact kill. You could also beat these guys in 1 turn with an Earth Tremor into a shooting star, but we'll need peril strats for other stuff anyways, and this is just way cooler than using Earth Tremor. We're able to upgrade badge points for the first time in the run, which will be useful for squeezing more damage out of Peril Mario. Once we deliver the necklace back to her, we unlock Flurry, who is going to be surprisingly helpful for this challenge, but probably not for the reasons you might think. More on that in a second. Heading into the Great Tree, we're ambushed by a pair of X-Nauts that's unavoidable, but they're weak and can be killed with a couple jumps from Mario and Goombella. The enemies in this leg of the Great Tree are pretty easy to slip past, and I made sure to grab this power punch in this bush right here because it can be a very useful item in this context. We have to fight another X-Knot in order to get the red key to save the puny elder, so that'll add another turn to the counter. From here, there's quite a gap in required encounters, but there's a lot of tricky optional ones to avoid, so I'd like to show off a bit of that, if you don't mind, of course. You want to see it? Okay, sure. This X-Knot right here is pretty inconvenient since you need to use the puny orb to gather the punies and blow them across this gap, but this is actually where Flurry comes into play. Her wind can stun enemies in the overworld, and luckily the remake reduced the delay between pressing the button and the enemy being stunned, so it's even easier to use. I stunned him to slip past and fall down to grab this Thunder Rage and Shine Sprite, and when heading back up, my punies actually happened to run into the perfect spot that I could stun the X-Knot and blow every puny across without even placing the puny orb. In the next room, there's a Piter that can drop down and scare your punies away, so I blew them down in order to avoid that. But I discovered later that in the remake, there's actually a thin area that you can walk past him where he won't even drop down. Either way though, he isn't an issue. After progressing for a while and unlocking the other 90 punies, we have to once again contend with this stupid ass X-Knot, but he's pretty easy to stun and get all of the punies past again. But then we get to this area with the winding path. There's a couple Piters in the middle that will scare the punies, and there's much more opportunities for them to fall when that happens in this room. In the original, I had to do some obnoxious strategies where I got enough punies across to beat the jabbies, locked them down with the puny orb in the following room, and then slowly worked the rest of them across. But in the remake, well, these guys also have thin areas along the edge where they don't get triggered, so I was able to literally just walk past them. Hopping across this block still lets the punies follow you without triggering the Piters, so this room was actually really easy. From here, we just have some annoying pale piranhas to stun and avoid a couple times, and then eventually we make it to the Great Tree escape sequence. Crump forces you to fight a couple X-Knot goons during the escape, so once again we can one-turn kill them and move on. Magnus von Grapple is the Chapter 2 boss, but as you probably guessed, we can absolutely destroy him with peril strats. I made sure to set Mario to 1 health by using the water right before the escape sequence, so combining this with Jumpman and that power punch just because, Magnus can get completely rolled in a single power bounce, closing out Chapter 2. Here we go. Chapter 3 is a huge undertaking in this challenge because it has by far the most required battles in the game, because obviously it has the whole tournament thing for the story. Luckily, you don't need to think too far ahead at any given point because you're always able to head back to Rogueport and gather anything that you might come up with a need for. The biggest upgrade we can grab right away is that Power Rush is now available for sale from the lovely House of Badges, and that adds 2 damage to Mario's peril or danger state. Ranking up Koops now is also going to be very helpful. I also finally grabbed Power Plus from Dazzle, and I also picked up Peekaboo to use for viewer convenience whenever I have extra badge points to spend on it. There's a bunch of other random things I ended up doing throughout this chapter, but I'll address those things when we get to them. The main thing we have to keep in mind throughout the Glitz Pit, besides just playing optimally, are Grubba's fight conditions. All of the same ones from the original game are present, with the addition of use a partner skill at least once and use a partner skill at least twice. I'll go ahead and put the conditions up on screen and color code which ones are non-issues, which ones are sometimes an issue, and which ones will always require a reset. So without further ado, it's Glitz Pit time. I'm gonna bang these out as fast as I can because a lot of them, especially the earlier ones, are pretty trivial. The Goomba Bros will always have the appeal at least once condition, so appealing with Mario and power shelling with Koops is a quick finish. For the KP Koopas, there are many options for killing them in one turn, but I opted to roll the dice and Gale Force with Flurry, knowing I could reset if it failed. Luckily, it deleted them on the first try. The Poke Triplets were easily taken down by a Power Plus P boosted Power Shell, and this gave me my next level up as well. I killed the Dullbones team using a Pow Block to get around the no FP condition that I got, and then I killed the Lakitu and Spinies with an Earth Tremor to satisfy the special move condition. I went ahead and used an Earthquake item into a Power Shell to take out the bandits since Grubba blocked me from using Multi-Bounce with his fight condition. The Mind Bogglers were no problem thanks to my Power Pluses and the fact that the Dark Puff started low. A regular jump on the Piter and a Power Shell on the other two took them down in a single turn as well. A Quake Hammer with a Power Plus is exactly enough to kill the Hyperballed Clefs, and I went for a Quake Hammer into a Power Shell to blow up the Bob-Ombs and satisfy the partner move condition. And that brings us to the midpoint of the Glitz Pit with the fight against the Iron Clefts. Now this fight is famously scripted and BS, so it's going to soak up more than one turn. Before going into the fight against them, you want to make sure to head outside and get the Yoshi egg from Hoggle. The required loss from the Iron Clefs will trigger the egg to hatch, which will then let you beat them on the next attempt. So I started the fight with them and immediately ran away to lose in a single turn. Next, my Yoshi hatched and I named him Min-Turn as a callback to the last low turn count run. Now the next part is the really frustrating part for this style of run. Even if you rank up Yoshi and equip both Power Plus Ps available up to this point, Yoshi cannot kill the second Iron Cleft in one hit. The base damage for Gulp is 4 at regular rank and 5 at super rank, and attack buffs can only increase the damage on the front enemy. So given that they both have 6 health, the second Iron Cleft has to be gulped a second time to be killed, meaning the actual winning fight against them also takes 2 turns. Beyond that though, things come back down to earth. The red spike tops only have 5 health, so they can be killed with a single gulp, but I did have to reset a couple times due to getting bad luck with fight conditions. I got use a special move at least once against the bristles, so I tremored on they earth until they died. After this fight, you can go get the Super Hammer, which doesn't really do too much for us other than being a slight damage increase to the hammer, which is barely used in this challenge. Before going into the next fight, I went back to Rogueport to set Mario's health to 1 to enter Peril again. There's no stage hazards in Glitzville, so unfortunately, this backtracking is what it takes to be the best. With Peril strats active, I multi-bounced and then power shelled the Shady Koopas for a clean 1-turn kill. After defeating them, the Iron Clefs burst in for a rematch, and since they take 2 turns to kill, we're gonna have to take 1 turn to lose instead. This rematch is not required to win to progress the story. All you miss out on by running are the star points you would get from them. After resetting for some unfavorable conditions, I used my continued Peril status to destroy the Fuzzy team in a single move. I used the exact same strategy to 1-turn the Magic Koopa Masters, and then Bowser bursts in to challenge Mario to another bonus match. Just like the Iron Clefs, you can run away from Bowser to finish the fight in 1 turn, but due to the star point progression in the remake, it's very important to defeat him for Chapter 4 in this challenge. That'll of course be explained once we get there, but it's easy enough to do for now since I'm still in Peril. A quick power bounce makes short work of Bowser. Next on the chopping block is good old Crawdaddy. Arter Yu's video featured some interesting setups using point swap and Peril partners, but he had set those up much earlier in the Glitz pit. The reason I didn't even bother with that is a big mechanic change they made in the remake. In the original game, Arter Yu was able to set up Peril partners along the way by using point swap while at 1 FP to swap his partner to 1 HP. After this, he could put that partner away and let them sit at 1 HP until he needed to use Mega Rush P with them. I can't do this in the remake because they changed it so that every partner gets healed upon level up rather than just the active one. So that makes it pretty finicky to have a Peril partner for really any length of time. Luckily, in my run of the original, I didn't use Peril partners either, so I can use a similar strategy to that video. By equipping every attack increase I have available for Mario as well as Power Smash, I'm able to deal 14 damage with a single hammer attack. This leaves Darkcraw with 6 health, which can be perfectly cleaned up by using Mini Egg with a Power Plus P. Next up, Hamma, Bama, and Flare are super easy to take down with a Peril Quake Hammer, and since I leveled up and was no longer in Peril, I beat the Red Chomps with a Quake Hammer into a gulp. Before taking on the Dark Koopa Patrol, I had to backtrack all the way to Petalburg to pick up another POW block. I should have saved the one I used earlier, but oh well. Using this POW block, I can knock the Dark Koopa Patrol down to make it vulnerable to a huge Peril power bounce from Mario. Finally, aside from a bit more story stuff that I've been glossing over for this video of course, it's time to take on Rock Hawk. The remake removed the fight condition from Rock Hawk, but you actually didn't have to fulfill it to progress in the original either, so nothing has really changed. A Mega Rush boosted power bounce of course destroys him in a single move after all that shit he talks at the beginning of the fight. On to Macho Grubba, I made sure to pick up a Power Punch from the shop because that extra damage will come in super handy, and naturally I went for the full balls to the wall power bounce. With the Power Punch stacked on top, I only needed a mortal number of power bounces in order to 1-turn kill Grubba. Chapter 4 is a huge relief compared to Chapter 3 because we don't have nearly as many required fights. Before heading off to Twilight Town and challenging Dupless, it is very, very important to use overworld hazards to set Mario to 1 HP. Once you fight Dupless for the first time, you won't be able to leave back to Rogueport until clearing the rest of the chapter. There aren't any overworld hazards in the entire Chapter 4 area, so getting Mario to 1 health has to be done now. This also ties into why we had to defeat Bowser earlier. After beating Grubba, I barely leveled up and was left with just 2 star points. If I hadn't beaten Bowser, I would end up leveling up against First Dupless and be stuck without Peril, making it impossible to finish the chapter in the minimum number of turns. So with all of that said, let's head into Twilight Town and completely skip over all of the story cutscenes because they're irrelevant to the challenge. Avoiding the enemies on Twilight Trail is made quite easy with Flurry, but otherwise it would be a bit annoying. First Dupless is no big deal with Peril Mario since his HP and defense are exactly the same as Rock Hawk, who we destroyed. After that, I have to contend with all the Twilight Trail enemies without Flurry this time since she and my other partners sided with the fake Mario. It's not too hard once you figure out how to bait them, lose them, and then use that cooldown period to slip past. Right before we make it back to Twilight Town, we get ambushed by Dupless and we have to enter an unwinnable fight with him. This is just like the one that I forgot to count in the last video because I am good YouTuber. Running away on the first turn is the fastest and only way to get through this. After we join up with Vivian, we run into Dupless again, but the remake actually allows us to save a turn here. In order to skip out on him tediously challenging you to the exact same unwinnable fight, you're given a menu prompt to either fight him or escape. And if you select escape, the game plays out as if you just ran away from him, skipping the second fight with him. Much gameplay and story progression later, it's time to face off against Dupless again. Unfortunately in this fight, the remake comes back to steal away that turn we saved from the unwinnable fight a little bit ago. You can no longer kill Dupless in a single turn because the game will forcibly revive him with a life shroom in order to play out the Vivian returning cutscene. This is an Easter egg meant to acknowledge the fact that it was technically possible, although very, very unlikely for a new player, to beat Dupless in a single turn and skip the Vivian cutscene altogether in the original game. Oh well though, this means that overall Chapter 4 has the same turn count as it does in the GameCube game. Chapter 5 is another chapter that locks you into its location for the duration of the chapter, so we need to grab every useful thing before we go. Luckily though, there really isn't anything that we need that we don't already have, so I literally just jumped right onto the boat and headed to Keelhaul Key. The only thing I'll note is that you do have to pay Gus a couple times to pass to the east side of Rogueport since fighting him would obviously add another turn. After shipwrecking on the island, we're ambushed by 3 Ember Ghosts which can be dispatched with an Ice Storm and a Power Shell in my case. Avoiding the encounters between here and Pirate's Grotto is honestly not too bad, and then the next required fight is against 3 more Embers. Now I'd like to point out that this is where my rule set and Arthur Yu's rule set diverge a bit. In his run, he actually grinded an insane amount of star points by using a first strike on a fight with a single Buzzy over and over in Chapter 4. Since these technically don't count as turns in the game's code, he's able to use this to level high enough with Mario that the Embers no longer grant any star points and can be killed with the first attack badge. Now personally to me, this feels completely against the spirit of this challenge since you're completing hundreds of fights in order to skip just one of them later, but if you're a purist that goes only by the code of the game, I can at least understand the argument. I opted not to do it because this felt like the proper way to do the challenge to me. So I killed these 3 Embers exactly the same way as before, dealt with some more story business, and then headed into Pirate's Grotto. In the original, we were able to jump around the first set of Bill Blasters, but in the remake, they have super chunky hitboxes and there just seems to be no way around them, so we'll have to fight them. There's lots of options for taking them out. I opted to use a Gulp with Yoshi. Later in the grotto, there's a long hallway with 2 more sets of Bill Blasters. These were avoidable in the original, although I didn't realize or account for that in my video, but once again, they have chunky hitboxes in the remake and can't be avoided, so that's 2 more turns to add to the counter. In the Curse Chest room, there's another set of 3 Embers to be fought in order to get the key. This is another fight that Arthur Yu defeated with first attack, but again, I didn't do the grinding. For the third and final time, I beat them using an Ice Storm and a Power Shell. And now we get to one of the weirdest changes in the entire remake. In the hallway where we just defeated those 2 pairs of Bill Blasters, there's this bulky Bob-omb that drops down on you from the ceiling for a required fight. I'm really not sure why. There's no new mechanics or anything that this fight tries to teach you, nor are there new enemies. This and the Koopa fight in Chapter 1 are the only new encounters shoehorned in, but at least that first one served any sort of purpose. I've seen some comments saying that people didn't get this encounter in their first playthrough of the game, but I reset the game at least 10 times and tried different methods of squeezing past the trigger to no avail. So I went ahead and used a Thunder Rage, which was a fun way to kill them due to the bulky Bob-omb blowing up and getting the final hit on the other two enemies. On to Cortez. He works pretty similarly to the original game in the way that the turn restarts each time you end a phase, making it impossible to progress through each phase without taking an entire turn for each of them. Since he only has 20 HP per phase, I can use a normal jump on all 3 of them to finish the fight in 3 turns. As for Lord Crump, this was actually another moment I could have saved a turn in the original run. Arter Yu sets up Peril Yoshi during the Cortez fight without adding any extra turns and is able to carry this over to Lord Crump. Crump has 2 phases with 30 health each, but the turn doesn't end after defeating the first one, so with Peril Mario and Peril Yoshi, he can do a Power Bounce followed by a Peril Ground Pound to deal with both phases in 1 turn. I missed this in my video, but discovered that it's actually not possible in the remake at all. And the reason for this? You now get healed after the Cortez fight. In the original, your stats would carry over, including your new empty star power wheel, but in the remake, you get a free heal because accessibility and target audience reasons. So that means that all we can do for Crump is reset Mario to 1 HP and then head into the fight. There's definitely no way to deal 30 damage at this point with a full health partner, so we'll have to resign to beating this one in 2 turns yet again. I used a Shell Shield with Koops to protect our 1 health Mario from the turn he'll have to endure, and a couple power bounces later, Crump goes down. My minimum turns run in the original was far from optimal, but even if we adjust Arter Yu's turn count to not use those first attacks gained from level grinding, the remake adds 4 additional turns over what would be considered the optimal Chapter 5 in that version. Ouch. Luckily, this chapter plays out very similarly to the original, but this time I went into it with a better strategy thanks to Arter Yu's video. Before locking ourselves into the Excess Express, and by extension the Smorg fight, there's 4 different things we need to set up now. First, we need to make sure to use Chet Rippo to set Mario's FP to 5. It'll make sense why we're doing this in a moment. I also preemptively set Mario's HP to 5 while I was here, which will make it easier to take advantage of danger buffs later, but isn't actually necessary now. We also need to make sure we have a point swap in our inventory, which can be bought from the shop in Glitzville. Ultra ranking Goombella is the 3rd piece of this puzzle, as it gives her extra damage, which will make things a bit easier for us. The 4th and final thing to do before hopping onto the train is to grab this copy of Double Dip that can be accessed with this boat panel. With all of that set up, it's time to proceed. There's no enemy encounters on the train right now, so we'll skip to Riverside Station briefly. None of the fights in here are required, but it's also very important to have the first attack badge, otherwise you can't complete this in the fewest amount of turns. There's this room in Riverside Station with 3 normal Goombas that have to be defeated to unlock the switches that build this staircase. Since we have a couple levels under our belts, although admittedly not very many, we are able to kill the Goombas in the overworld with the first attack badge. All of the other enemies in Riverside Station are easy to avoid, so let's move on to the Smorg. Now here's where we can see all of those pieces we prepared all come together. Using Double Dip, we're able to consume FP to use a Thunder Rage to kill the Smorg tentacles and open up the weak point, and then we can point swap our now 1 FP over to Goombella's health, putting her in peril. Then, with buffs from Mega Rush P, Power Rush P, and other assorted attack increases, Goombella is able to do a huge multi-bonk and take out the Smorg in a single turn. This is a much more consistent and cool method than what I did in my original run. After that, the only other enemies present in this chapter are the Dark Boos and Poshley Sanctum, which are super easy to ignore. This is where we can finally breathe a sigh of relief in this challenge. After completing Chapter 6, we unlock Frankie's Trouble in the Trouble Center, which is super easy to complete and yields a fantastic reward. Annoyingly, we have to pay Gus twice again to complete it, but 20 coins doesn't really actually matter for anything. Completing Frankie's Trouble gives us a card for the Pianta Parlor that unlocks the Tube game, but more importantly unlocks Power Rush badges in exchange for Piantas. Yes, we're of course going to be using the classic Danger Mario strat. This is why we set Mario to 5 HP, and speaking of that, I did end up going back to Shet Rippo again to swap back to 10 FP since it'll be relevant later. You can farm coins to buy Piantas, but that would take forever, so instead I'm going to farm the new spicy matching game in the remake. It's tricky, but I literally have hours invested into practicing this thing for the badge duplication video I did, so in no time I was able to buy 9 more Power Rush badges, which will be more than enough to do the rest of the run. So on to Chapter 7 itself. The huge backtracking quest with General White is much faster and less frustrating than the original game due to the new backtracking pipes. But there's no required combat in any of it, so we're going to skip ahead by a lot. After avoiding all the enemies in Far Outpost and the moon, we're ambushed by a required battle against 2 elite X-Nauts in the X-Naut Fortress. Danger Mario fears no foe, so he completely destroys them in a single turn. From here, Flurry is going to be our best friend since she's really the only consistent way to avoid these X-Naut encounters in these tight hallways. I rounded up all of the key cards, completely forgetting for a moment that the Switch remake added a 4th key card. This additional card is found in Peach's bathroom, where unfortunately we have to defeat an elite X-Naut in order to actually get it. This adds an extra turn that wasn't the original game, and god, you hate to see it as a min-turner. After that, we can play the rest of the fortress the same as the GameCube version and challenge Magnus von Grapple 2.0. With Mario's attack both literally and figuratively to the moon, he stands no chance and dies to a single power bounce. And now we arrive at the final chapter, the Palace of Shadow. With Danger Mario and Ultra Ranked Goombella, we're already prepared for anything and everything that lies ahead. Like I mentioned in the beginning of the video, there are actually methods for skipping the Bombshell Bill Blasters, which could maybe be considered glitches depending on what you count as a glitch, but those don't exist in the remake, so we definitely do have to fight all 3 sets of them. The Dark Bones encounter can be taken out just the same as before with a multi-bounce, and then we can beat Gloomtail with a single power bounce. I know it feels like we're already flying through this chapter, but when it comes to Danger Mario, that kind of mimics the experience of playing the game. Next up is the Riddle Tower, which has a puzzle room with 4 Bones enemies in it. The Dull Bones can be killed with the first attack badge, but even though we've gained a bit more XP in the remake, we still can't kill the Red Bones with first attack. So that adds 3 more turns, 1 for Red Bones, 1 for Dry Bones, and 1 for Dark Bones. These are 3 turns that weren't counted in Arter-U's video, but I added those to his converted best score. Next are the 3 Shadows, which I didn't skip in the original because it felt like a glitch, and can't skip in this version since it's a different video game. I don't have as many power rushes as I had in the last run, but with a multi-bounce plus Rallywink plus second multi-bounce, I can still defeat all of them in 1 turn. After breezing through the second half of the Palace of Shadow, it's time to take on the 2 penultimate bosses, which are Grotus and Bowser. Both can be defeated with the exact same methods I used last time, but I'll recap them in case you haven't watched that video. Now would be a less good time to pause and go watch that one, but better late than never, I guess? A Fire Flower or any other attack item can be used to kill the initial Grotus X's that he spawns with, dropping his shield and allowing him to be killed with a normal jump. I do gain the final level up of the run from this, but since none of my stats depleted, this literally doesn't matter for the Bowser fight. As for that fight, I started off with a normal jump to kill Kammy Koopa and then used Rallywink to give Mario an extra turn. I don't have enough attack to kill Bowser with a normal jump, but that's why we have Power Bounce equipped still. Finally, it's time to take on the Shadow Queen. This fight is split up into 2 phases, of course, the first being against Shadow Peach and the second being against her true form. You need to deal 61 or more damage to end her first phase, which is easy with a power bounce, of course, but then you have to attack her with useless attacks for the next 3 turns in order to end the first phase. In the original game, there's actually a way to use Bomb Skip to skip one of these turns, which is a huge oversimplification of how it works, but trust me, it's easier for you if I don't explain it. But this doesn't work in the remake, so we have to take 4 turns to defeat Shadow Peach, just like I did in my first run because I didn't know the Bomb Squad strat. And now, 10 billion years of cutscenes later, we can fight the true final form of the Shadow Queen. And would you believe it, Danger Mario can break this too. A Power Bounce deals 115 damage to her, and then I can Rallywink and clean up the last bit of her health with a normal jump attack. Underwhelming? Yes. Optimal? Also yes. And so that brings us to the end of the minimum turn count run for the Thousand Year Door remake. I'll go ahead and show the total turn counts on screen for each chapter from 3 different runs. My original run, Arthur Yu's original run adjusted for my rule set, and the remake run. Overall, I played the remake run much more optimally than my original run, but there's so many extra turns added through new fights, a lack of skips, or forced heals preventing better peril strats that it still had a higher turn count. There weren't any chapters where we did better than the original other than the prologue, but that was because I missed a strategy that's available in both versions and not because of a remake change. Even though it's technically more turns than before, I still had a lot of fun playing this, and I'm really proud of the project overall. Hooktail is really the only spot that I think a turn could be saved, but like I already mentioned, I tried to no avail. If any of you guys managed to skip that turn or any other ones in the remake, comment down below or reach out to me through my Discord server. I'd love to see what you guys come up with. Huge shoutouts to Arthur Yu and his video, since I referenced it a million times throughout this one. It's so cool that somebody with even more game knowledge than me had put together such an optimized run, and it was super helpful for my run in the remake. Like I said before, I will of course have it linked below if you want to check it out. And, well, thank you guys so much for watching all the way through this video. It was a ton of work, so if you enjoyed it, make sure you get subscribed to see future videos from my channel. Also, make sure to like and comment, because all of those interactions stacked together help tell YouTube that my videos are worth pushing further on the platform. Massive shoutouts to all my Bringle channel members for going above and beyond to support the channel. It really means a lot and helps me more than you know. If you want to join this elite squad of supporters, there's a big blue join button on my channel page for that. You also get early access to new videos and occasional behind the scenes content. And welp, that's all from me for today. Take care, guys.